1%, where you're seeing these immense concentrations. And these immense concentrations occur in certain sectors of the economy, retailing, finance, and so on. Because what you find is that there are manipulations going on in the financial realm through which people are extracting immense wealth. For instance, we have in the United States, and indeed around the world, growth of something called hedge funds, private partnership accounts. And the managers of the hedge funds usually take home in their own pocket about 20% of what it is they make in a year. Last year, the top 25 hedge funds in the United States, the people who managed them each took home on average $250 million in 1 year. Now, hedge funds are risky, so before you all go off and decide to become a hedge fund manager, you should know that one of them lost $6 billion in 6 weeks earlier this year, so it's risk. But when you ask yourself the question, who is it that works so hard that they deserve $250 million in a year for what they do? And what is it they're doing? They're playing with fictitious money. And actually, if you start to look at the way markets are structured, when you look at currency swaps and you look at derivatives, and the whole set of new financial markets have been constructed since 1990. And these financial markets, in terms of the assets circulating in these financial markets, moved from zero in 1990 to a figure that is now 10 times the gross domestic products of the United States, Europe, Japan, all the OECD countries combined. What is that money about? What is it doing? And how come people are extracting such immense wealth from pushing that money around? You then also see, particularly in the United States, that of course we have things called elections. We have something called a democracy. But it is so clearly a democracy of money. Money buys elections. And the reason that Republicans are not very different from Democrats is because both of them are subject to that money power. And that money power is also to political decision making. So when you ask the question, why all these tax breaks for the rich, it has a lot to do with the fact that the rich control political power. I don't know how many of you saw Michael Moore's film, Fahrenheit 9/11. There's a wonderful moment there where Bush is talking to an audience and he says, some people call you the have-mores. These were the really, really rich contributors to his campaign. He said, I call you my political base. All you need in the United States to win elections is a political base of maybe 500 important people. That's all you need. And this is called democracy. Now, I was very interested about this concentration of class power. And of course, in the United States, it's very difficult even to use the word class. People in the United States like to believe they live in a classless society. The only media that uses the term class war is the Wall Street Journal and the right. And they use it as a term to mock whatever you are saying. So to talk class war or to talk class politics is actually extremely difficult. But it seemed to me very important to try to do it. Because one of the things I do every year is I teach a course on Marx's Capital, Volume 1. And it's a very interesting book, fascinating piece of literature, wonderful book to read. I now teach it in the shadow of the Empire State Building. And every year now I get over 100 students, graduate students, in the course. I feel the revolution has finally arrived. But the interesting thing about this book is that it tries to do two things. It tries to describe an actually working capitalist society, mainly, of course, Britain in the 19th century. But it also does something else, is it tries to write a critique of classical political economy, a critique of liberal theory, and particularly the work of Adam Smith and Ricardo. And what Marx does is to say they have certain proposals about how the world should be. I'm going to imagine a world in which their proposals are true and have come to be. And then I'm going to say, what kind of world would it actually look like? Now, those two aims often conflict in the book, and so sometimes confusions result from whether you're critiquing the utopian liberal theory or whether you're talking about an actually existing capitalism. In chapter 2 of Capital, Marx actually assumes there are going to be perfectly functioning markets. No thievery, no violence, a pure market system, well-established property rights, laws, and the like. And he then asked the question, how come this market system, which is egalitarian, very important point he makes, it's egalitarian, and I'm going to assume it's egalitarian. That is, in the market, equal value exchanges for equal value. We make that assumption. What Marx then demonstrates is the truth of a wonderful adage that there is nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. Because what he shows, by the time you get to chapter 25 of volume 1 of Capital, is that in a system of that kind, the rich are going to grow very, very much richer, and the poor are going to grow very much poorer. And he demonstrates this theoretically, simply by saying, if people begin with unequal assets, unequal endowments, and you then treat them equally, then over time, the inequalities expand dramatically. Now, I wanted to write about this, but I know perfectly well in the United States, as well as in many other parts of the world, to quote Marx is in fact to mean that nobody's going to listen to you. So I decided I wanted to write a book about the history of neoliberalism, which didn't mention Marx, even though it was going to tell that story of increasing inequality. There is a connection between this dispossession that's going on all over the place and the massive accumulation of wealth. Now, there's a curious thing about American academia. Even on the left, in American academia, people don't like to talk about class. Radical politics is about gender, race, sexual orientation, forget class. And I think those elements are incredibly important. And I don't think that there's a problem in putting them together, because the global proletariat right now is about 70% women, in developing countries in particular. And it's also people of color. So race, class, and gender go together. And my big problem with the left in the United States, and actually throughout everywhere, is I say, look, what you've seen waged against you these last 30 years has been a very sophisticated form of class struggle. And if it looks like class struggle, and it walks like class struggle, and it feels like class struggle, then we better call it class struggle. And that, it seems to me, is where we're at. A situation where the only answer to this neoliberal juggernaut is indeed to push for class struggle. And when you start to talk about that, for instance, when I start to talk about this key aspect of accumulation by dispossession, when I talk to people in India, in the social movements, they understood perfectly well what I was talking about. They just said, yes, that's exactly right. And we have to fight class struggle against accumulation by dispossession, but that requires a different tactic to the kind of class struggle that was traditionally fought by working class in factories and political organisation of that kind. Accumulation by dispossession, it seems to me, is one of the big themes addressed in the World Social Forum. It is one of the big themes of what is happening to people everywhere. People being dispossessed of genetic rights to seeds and things of that kind by the corporations. It will soon be, if you want to have a kid, you probably have to apply to a corporation because they've patented life. So what you need, it seems to me, is a different formulation of what the nature of that class struggle is going to be about and how it's going to be waged. Because if you ask the question, how many people are doing well under neoliberalism, the answer is not that many. And if we start to talk about some unity of political action against neoliberalism, and particularly in the light of its instabilities, then it seems to me we have somewhere to go politically. And that's where I'm at. Okay, thanks very much.